The world had shrunk to the scent of her skin, a dizzying mix of vanilla, champagne, and the faint, clean sweat of a long day. My cheek was pressed against the cool silk of her wedding dress, the bodice loosened, the intricate buttons at the back now undone by my own trembling fingers just minutes before. We were a tangle of linens and white fabric on the floor of the bridal suite, the frantic energy of the reception finally, completely, gone. Her heart hammered against my ear, a frantic rhythm that mirrored my own. This was wrong. This was a betrayal of cosmic proportions. And yet, as her fingers traced the line of my spine through my maid of honor dress, I could no longer remember a time when my entire being didn't yearn for this specific, catastrophic collapse. I had just helped her out of the gown, my hands lingering a moment too long on her shoulders, when her tears started. Not the happy tears from the altar, but deep, shuddering sobs that seemed to tear themselves from her very core. I'd pulled her into an embrace, a gesture meant to comfort, but the moment she collapsed against me, something shifted. The air thickened, charged with a truth we had spent the entire wedding season desperately ignoring. Her sobs quieted into hiccups, and then into a silence that was louder than any music from the dance floor. She tilted her head back, her eyes, still shimmering with tears, searching mine. There was a question there, a plea. And then, with an inevitability that felt like destiny and damnation rolled into one, her lips were on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was frantic, desperate, a floodgate breaking. The taste of salt from her tears, the sweet remnants of cake on her tongue, it was a sacrament of ruin. My hands, of their own volition, fisted in the hair that I had so carefully styled hours earlier, pins scattering onto the plush carpet with soft, metallic ticks. Her hands slid from my back to my hips, pulling me closer until I was straddling her lap, the deep violet of my dress a stark, sinful contrast against the pristine white of her slip. This was the woman I had stood beside today, beaming as she vowed her life to another. This was the bride, and I, her maid of honor, was now irrevocably, hopelessly lost in her. It hadn't always been this torrent of feeling. It began as a trickle, a slow, persistent drip that eroded my defenses over the months of wedding planning. Sarah and I had been friends since college, the kind of easy, comfortable friendship built on shared pizzas and late-night study sessions. When she got engaged to Mark, I was the first person she called, her voice bubbling with a joy I genuinely felt. I threw my arms around her, celebrated with cheap Prosecco, and said yes immediately when she asked me to be her maid of honor. The first fissure appeared during the dress fitting. The shop was a temple of tulle and taffeta, and Sarah stood on a pedestal, bathed in soft, golden light. She was trying on a sleek, ivory gown that made her look like a goddess stepped down from a forgotten myth. As she turned, the skirt swirling around her, her eyes met mine in the vast mirror. "Well?" she asked, her voice soft, vulnerable. My breath caught. It wasn't that she was beautiful. I had always known that. It was the raw, unguarded hope in her gaze, directed solely at me. The consultant was fussing with the train, but in that mirror, it was just us. I walked over, my steps slow, as if moving through water. My fingers, without a conscious thought from my brain, reached out and brushed a stray thread from her bare shoulder. The contact was electric. A shiver ran through her, minute but unmistakable. Her skin was impossibly soft. My thumb traced the line of her collarbone for a heartbeat too long. Our eyes held in the reflection a silent, bewildering conversation passing between us. The air was thick with the unsaid. I could smell her perfume, something light and floral, and beneath it, the simple, clean scent of her. I wanted to press my lips to that spot on her shoulder, to feel that shiver against my mouth. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, until the consultant chirped, "Just needs a hem," and the spell was broken. We both looked away, flustered, a faint pink blooming on Sarah's cheeks. After that, I started noticing everything. The way she'd bite her lower lip when concentrating on seating charts. The specific melody of her laugh, which could cut through the din of any crowded room and find me. The way her hand would find the small of my back to guide me through a door, the touch lingering, burning through the fabric of my shirt. We spent countless evenings on her couch, laptops open, surrounded by swatches of fabric and vendor contracts. Our legs would be tucked up, knees brushing. Sometimes we'd just talk, the wedding planning forgotten. She'd tell me her fears, that she wasn't ready, that marriage was a cage, that she was making a terrible mistake. I'd listen, my heart a frantic bird in a cage of my own, and I'd assure her it was just pre-wedding jitters. I was the supportive friend, the rock. But inside, a treacherous hope was beginning to sprout. One night, after a particularly stressful argument with the florist, she was crying in frustration. I pulled her into a hug, and she buried her face in my neck. Her arms tightened around me, and she didn't let go for a long time. We just stood there in her living room, swaying slightly. I could feel the dampness of her tears on my skin, the solid warmth of her body against mine. My hand moved in slow circles on her back, and when her crying subsided, she didn't pull away. She just rested her head on my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. I closed my eyes, committing the weight of her, the feel of her, to memory. This was the spark. This was the moment the trickle became a stream, and I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that I was in deep, dangerous waters. The bachelor party was Mark's, but the bachelorette was mine to plan. I organized a weekend at a secluded cabin, a mix of silly games, good wine, and relaxation for Sarah. The last night, we built a roaring fire in the stone hearth. The other bridesmaids, tipsy and tired, had drifted off to bed one by one, until it was just Sarah and me, wrapped in a thick wool blanket on the couch, the fire casting dancing shadows across her face. We were talking about nothing, our voices low. The silence that fell between us was comfortable, deep. She shifted, turning to face me, tucking her legs up beneath her. The firelight caught the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you through all this," she whispered, her voice rough with sleep and wine. "My pleasure," I said, and the words felt inadequate, a pathetic placeholder for the storm of emotion inside me. The week leading up to the wedding was a special kind of hell. We were surrounded by people constantly, family, friends, vendors. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, we found moments of stolen, breathless intimacy that felt like throwing gasoline on a fire. A brush of hands while sorting place cards, a lingering look across a table at the rehearsal dinner, a whispered, "I can't stop thinking about the cabin" in a darkened hallway that made my knees weak. The night before the wedding, we were in her childhood bedroom, going over her vows. She was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the bed, and I was in her desk chair. She read them aloud, her voice steady. They were beautiful, poetic, and every word felt like a shard of glass in my heart. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Do they sound right?" she asked. The reception was a whirl of noise and color from which I felt completely detached. I gave my speech, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, all practiced smiles and charming anecdotes. I watched her dance with her new husband, his hands possessive on her waist, and I drank champagne until the room took on a soft, blurry edge. It was during the slow dances that she found me, standing alone near the terrace doors. Her eyes were a little wild, the calm bride veneer finally cracking. "I need your help with my dress," she said, her voice tight. "A button feels loose." A flimsy excuse. We both knew it. I just nodded and followed her, my heart a battering ram against my ribs. We didn't go to the common restroom. We went upstairs, to the private bridal suite reserved for her and Mark later that night. The moment the door clicked shut, the silence was absolute. She turned to me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The music from below was a distant, mocking thrum. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. My own composure shattered. "Sarah," and then she was in my arms, and I was backing her against the door, my mouth crashing down on hers. It was nothing like the cabin or her bedroom. This was raw, feral, a collision of two people who had reached their breaking point. This was the climax of all our stolen moments, the explosive, unavoidable end. We tore at each other's clothes, my maid of honor dress being pulled over my head, her wedding dress being pushed from her shoulders. We fell to the floor in a heap of silk and satin and frantic, desperate hands. There was no tenderness now, only a frantic, clawing need to brand each other, to claim what was never ours to keep. My mouth was on her neck, her breast, her stomach. When I moved lower, tasting the essence of her, she let out a choked sob, her hips arching off the floor. Her pleasure was my anchor in the storm, the only thing that felt real. And when it was my turn, when her touch found the aching, desperate core of me, I came apart with a silent scream, my body convulsing against her knowing fingers. It was the most intense, devastating release of my life, leaving me hollowed out and trembling. We lay there on the floor, amidst the ruins of our friendship and her wedding day, our bodies glistening with sweat, our breathing slowly returning to normal. The reality of what we had just done began to seep into the room, cold and unforgiving. We had crossed a line from which there was no return. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe to Sapphic Tales so you don't miss the next one. We didn't speak. What was there to say? We dressed in silence, our movements slow, heavy with the weight of our actions. I rebuttoned her wedding dress, my fingers now steady, the final act of my role. She fixed her smudged makeup in a gilded mirror, her face a carefully constructed mask once more. When she was put back together, the beautiful, blushing bride, she turned to me. She walked over, took my face in her hands, and kissed me one last time. It was soft, lingering, and tasted like goodbye. "I love you," she whispered, the words a secret for me alone. "I think I always have." Then she turned and left the room, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage of our paradise. I didn't go back to the reception. I gathered my things and drove home through the empty streets, the first light of dawn painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. There was no anger, no regret for loving her. only a profound, bone-deep sorrow for the timing, for the life we would never have. A week later, a postcard arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name and address written in her familiar, looping script. It was a picture of a stormy sea. On the back, she had written only 2 words: "I'm sorry." I never saw her again. She and Mark moved across the country for his job, a planned move that now felt like a divine intervention. The friendship group eventually drifted apart. Life moved on. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, I allow myself to remember. Not the pain, but the moments in between. The brush of her shoulder in the bridal shop. The warmth of her hand on my back. The sound of her laugh. The feel of her skin in the firelight. The look in her eyes when she told me she loved me. I was the maid of honor. I stood by her side, promised to support her, to hold her up. And I did. I just never expected that in holding her, I would lose myself. I fell for the bride, and in doing so, I gave away a piece of my heart that I will never get back. It was a beautiful, tragic, glorious mistake, and I would not trade a single second of the fall. If it kept you hooked, subscribe now to Sapphic Tales so you never miss the next.